So Daniel, what was like the number one reason why you wanted to put thoughts together? I mean, why these reflections?
Well, I mean, I didn't intend it. No, I didn't intend it. You write things when you listen to some of the work that these wonderful people have done, and you're moved by it, or you're inspired, or there's an insight, or you want to capture it. A lot of times it's to internalize what was said, and that's how that happened. And then one day I went, oh, there's 100 of them, so that's a good number to cut off. Oh. So I was like, okay, so we'll cut them off, and did 100. So there wasn't an intention to write a book. I don't know if there's ever an intention to write a book. It
just like emerges out of Daniel's hands.
I don't know. There was no intention to write anything. It just came together.
Well, yeah, that's oh my gosh, I just like, sorry. Yes, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Sorry, I literally just like completely lost my train of thought. It'll come back to me.
That's all right. It'll come back to you.
Yeah.
If you type out a reflection, you'll internalize it and not lose it.
Yeah. See, what's my problem? Come on, get with it, girl. So yeah, right. Oh, okay, that's what I was going to say. Yay, thankfully it came back to me. So I think what's really neat, and what I hope thoughts will also inspire people to consider, not only the actual thoughts within this and the content, which is so great, all of the different reflections that have come together, and, like we said, birthed out of also lots of conversations and reading of the contemporary thinkers, and thinkers of old as well.
Sure.
But is that, a lot of these pieces, what are these are collected, like, say you have pieces over time, you can do something with them,
Yes.
This kind of proves like the little bit every day, or the little bit incrementally can be built into something, right? Suddenly you have 100 of them, whatever it is, 100 of whatever is, and you can put it together. And it's so neat these days that you can actually do, you can go to Create Space and you can make these types of things.
Absolutely.
And just, make yourself a book, take it out of the like kind of virtual sort of like fuzzy, quasi physical land of like the computer, not that doesn't exist, and then put it in like an actual, book form where you can like hold it. Yeah. It's kind of neat. So I just wanted to say, like, I hope it's encouraging to people in that respect. Like, even if they're building, over time Substack articles or poems or whatever it is, you can kind of put those together and make it into a book.
I think it is, it cannot be overstated how much can be done incrementally. Yeah. It's just that incremental is so incremental. It is so.
There's no way.
Every single day there are 24 hours. And if I told you, hey, Michelle, sit here for 2 hours, it would feel like, oh my gosh, that's forever. If I were to say, eat food for 3 hours straight, you'd be like, no, it's impossible. Like, I can transform 2 hours into an eternity by positioning you or forcing you to do something, right? So our relationship to time changes relative to our mode. And if you, we always go, oh, I don't have time, or, oh, when will I get the time, or different things like that. And don't get me wrong, life is very busy. I don't mean to belittle that in any way whatsoever. But you really cannot underscore your emotional relationship to time as having a big, big, big impact on how you think about time and how you use time. And if you were to simply position yourself to life in terms of an incremental mindset, then there's an encouragement in that also will help you realize how much time you do have. Like, again, I can turn 2 hours into an eternity by making you do something you don't want to do. Likewise, if you were to go into 2 hours and just really flow, like really go, because you're writing on something that lit you when you heard it and you're not putting it off, you're making it happen, you'd be amazed how many 5,000 word essays that you can get done in 2 hours, or just in very short period of times, because of your engagement with that time. And changing your relationship to time and your emotional feelings that you feel in relation to that time, which comes with just belief in the power of what can emerge built up to, you've just got to think about time differently.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think too, I think the book in a sense is a testament to, and just really also your mode of engagement with time, and like what I've learned from that and how to incorporate that in my own sort of creating is like, it's to really get a different perspective on what you're using as your metrics.
Yes.
Don't use like it's wild how much it changes when you start thinking about like, instead of it being like the metric of how much time are you spending on it, how many words are you writing, but really make it about like, what is like the meter, what is like that racing that's inside of you.
Completely.
Then it just changes everything when you listen to that racing, when that's your meter, right? Then it's your, you know, meter, like your metronome. Start doing that. Start thinking about what is your metronome, what's that beating you hear inside, because then when you do it from that place, you will start to make and generate, and even if it's very little over, you know, a lot of time, you're still building something. And it's just, I just really want, you know, I really hope that, you know, people can be encouraged in that way to realize that like you are already making, you are already generating. Just sort of like see it, recognize it, and also don't use the general, don't get caught up in the metrics, because the metrics is what will you know really screw you, honestly, in terms of like actually being productive.
I personally think any sort of like word, oh, I need to write this many words, oh, I need to write this long, oh, I need to do this, that, I'm not in favor of it personally. I don't want to say it can't help anyone. I think the only question you ask is, did you capture the fire? Like, did you articulate fully the point you were trying to say? And did you do it? Did you do it? And if it's 500 words, great. If it's 10,000 words, great. If it's 3,000 words, great. If it took you 30 minutes, great. If it took you 2 minutes, great. Like, did you complete the thing? Did you bring it to a close? Like, did you capture it? And if you did, you're done. Yeah. Now you'll revise it, and you may go, oh, I missed it. Oh, well, and it might open up. But basically, you should, if there's some sort of fire where you watch something or an idea hits you, you should sit down and you should capture it. And you should finish when it is done, and that's that. And you shouldn't ask any more questions. If it ends up being 70,000 words and no one's going to publish, you know, any crazy Hegelian jargon on Hegel, who cares? You don't ask that. You don't ask that while you're... If you start asking questions about, is this too long, is this too short, while you're writing, the writing dies. Yeah. It's over. It's like Lot looking at his wife and turning into salt. Like, if you pull yourself out of the writing to ask yourself questions about the writing, the flow's gone. And then you're like, what was I trying to say? And it's gone. Yeah. You really should not do that. You should just go. You should simply ask, is this completing the thought? Is this bringing the story together? Is this whatever? Like, is it coming? Are you capturing the flame?
And I think too, a lot of times, like, even those questions, though, those are better questions than how many words is this or whatever. You know, a lot of times I think if you're really getting in touch with the only metric being the meter of that metronome inside, you start, you know, those questions start to dissipate, and really you start to, at the end of your whatever, or like when you're reflecting on it, like, am I proud of this? Like, did I put my best in this? Did this do what I was hoping it would do? Do I have a sense of this being like complete? You know, that's where you ask these questions, and that's very good, you know. Yes. But I think when you're letting it go, like when it's kind of like just flowing, let it flow, you know, continue to write, continue to just let it completely
and I will say,
process out.
Whatever medium you feel like you can flow best in, is if you can write without stopping, you should do that. You know, if you can type quickly, you need to type quickly. Like, whatever is going to make whatever's going to make the tool invisible is what you should do. Yeah,
definitely. I think that's totally right. And I think, you know, it's funny, something that came up in a conversation that I had with Bethany Tabor was about like how potential is very important. This is why we can create it all, right? But it's almost like it's funny because in that conversation I talked about also the conversation I had with Sam Willman, where she talks about like the Goldilocks zone, like this idea that, you know, not too much, not too little kind of thought. And that's similar with potential. Like, actually sometimes too much potential is crushing, because you're like, I don't even know, like, I have something I want to create, but like, how am I going to say it? There are millions of words. Like, how will I know which ones to choose? Right? Versus like, if you have no potential, if you have like so little potential, then you're like, you have no room to work with, right? You can't even make anything because you have not enough potential, right?
Right.
So the Goldilocks zone is this flow. This is the flow. And I think it's just kind of interesting to me, because I was kind of thinking about like how, I think it's funny. It took, see, like, just from like a personal note, you've been writing for a lot longer, like, just, you know, since basically your childhood, pretty much. This is true, people. 8-year-old Daniel, okay? And so, like, for me, you know, I really only started to I've only been doing that really, like, honestly, kind of for myself and for that metronome inside for, I don't know, maybe 7-ish years-ish, you know. And it's taken quite some time.
Oh, yeah.
To kind of get to the place where you don't think about the metrics, you don't think about
right.
a task that you have to complete and all of that. Not that there's anything wrong with learning how to do that, but it's like, it's so amazing though once you actually do get out of the like standard metrics mindset, how it's just, there's something quite liberating about it. Like the stuff I used to get hung up on when writing, I are not even like I don't anymore. It's not that I'm like, you know, obviously there's a lot of trial and error, and there's always going to be like mistakes and things that need to be perfected and all of that, but in terms of just like allowing yourself to write the poem, you know, get the ideas out, you know, just allow the flow. It's quite amazing when you start to like just let those metrics fall away to the wayside and really get in touch with what is that metronome. Suddenly it's like you're not overwhelmed with all of the possibilities. You take the potential given and you kind of run with it in the direction of that compelling, of that motivation or whatever it is. And it's just quite interesting. I was just reflecting on that, like how different the experience is to write when you're still stuck in the, you know, in the metrics really. And then when you get out of that and how you're like, wow, this is so, it's so different. It feels so different in experience. And it's weird because both take effort, right? Both take like actual, you know, when it comes to really like consistent work and building, you know, really, like I always think like, you know, I really appreciate and learn that about you, like these ambitious projects, you know, it's like, it really does take a lot of effort, but it's like, but that flow is there. So it's like, it's this combination of like effort and ease. I guess what I want to say. That's the sweet spot, right? That's the Goldilocks. It's the bothness. And I think we don't always hold room for bothness in like life, especially in modern life. But we kind of just think about it like, oh, you're a writer, just like, it's just picking daisies, or you write things, you just, but it's like, it's this combination, right? It's this combination of the effort and the ease. Right. And it's weird though, because like, a lot of times, like the mindset of metrics ends up being like, I don't know how to put this. It's weird because I always think like everything's a bothness. Okay, so this flow state is a type of both ease and effort, and like, but the metrics can be a type of ease and effort too. What I mean to say is like the effort though is like grueling in like almost a crushing way, like not in like the I'm climbing a mountain, this is really hard, but this is really getting somewhere. It's like the, I don't know if I'm ever getting anywhere. What am I doing with my life? What am I doing with what I'm doing? It's like, that's the type of grueling, but the ease of it comes from like, ding, like you get the little bell, like I did this many words.
It's ease,
so it's like
existential.
Exactly, from like an external thing. So but I just wanted to share some of these thoughts.
No, you know, I mean, basically it's Ivan Illich. You had to be de-schooled out of school, basically, because of metrics. Metrics are existentially easier because you don't have to question if there's value. You've got a check mark, so there's value, right? But there's also a kind of gruelingness in the fact that, you know, it's like you have to meet the metrics, right? I mean, there's a few things.
But then there's existential when, like, you're making the metrics for, like, when you're doing it alone, when you're not doing it for the metrics of everyone else. If you're doing it by yourself,
it's very existential. But that's the only way to compound. Like,
yes.
I mean, generally speaking, if it can be put in terms of metrics, you can't take it with you. It has to stay with the metrics. It can't be yours. Like, it has to stay in the school system. It has to stay in the capitalist system. Like, if it can be understood in terms of metrics, you can't take it with you. Therefore, you can't build with it. You can't build anything with it.
Sorry guys. I just like, it was so hilarious this one day. It was just so funny when you were talking about like building your career and stuff like that. And there's such a language of that. It's like, no, Bob, you didn't build your career. You built up that other person's business.
It's a crazy
what do you have?
I really don't understand.
Which, not that there's a merit to that. There's a place and a beauty and a value to that. Thank God people do that.
Yeah.
But just don't think of it the right way, at least. Just be honest about it.
You are not building a career. You have a career. And if that's what you want, by all means. But don't think that you're building someone else's business.
Exactly.
You're researching for someone else's department. I mean, you're not building. It doesn't mean it's bad. You may not want to build. That's fine. But don't one day wake up when you're 60 and go, wait a minute, I didn't build anything, and be surprised. If you wake up one day and you're 60, it's like, I didn't build anything because I didn't want to build anything.
Right. And
great.
No
problem.
Right. And you could be like, I helped build something else.
Yes, I was selfless. Maybe there's
a selflessness in that.
That's
but
right.
I think there's something when I heard you say about take it with you, that's where you're going to be like, that's when you're creating your own stuff.
Yes, because you can only take your own stuff with you.
Exactly, and that's a choice that people will make in life. Yes. Will they want to make their own stuff? Will they want to contribute to other people's stuff? And that's perfectly fine.
Just do not be existentially confused.
Don't be confused about them, and realize that they're apples and oranges. They're both types of like contributions, which are very valuable in our society and in life.
Absolutely.
But it's like it's different ballgame. Different ballgame in terms of just what you're ultimately.
It's different risk strategies.
Yeah, different risks.
If you build your own thing, nobody may want it. So it's different risk strategies. But no, so metrics, if it can be understood in terms of metrics, then then you can't take it with you. Unless you create your own metrics, unless you create your own standard, but those are internal compasses, and those are not really metrics in the same way that we're describing.
Right.
I think generally writing should be, to use the language you were saying on ease and difficult, like writing should be easy, the rewriting should be hard, like the editing should be hard, like the actual writing, like if that's
a good point.
If the writing itself, it doesn't flow, then there's a problem.
That's where I agree. Like there's something about, well, if you're just like, if it's like pulling teeth,
then you're probably not doing something of value.
Yeah, just like, well, I don't know, it's kind of funny too. It's like, well, if you're pulling teeth to write this, isn't it going to feel like pulling teeth to read this? I mean, there could potentially be a correlation there, like versus if you're writing in the flow state and from that compelling feeling. Like I like that language a lot. I use that. And, there's kind of like in that sort of Roca concept of like that it's just sort of overflowing from you. Then I think that the hope is that kind of conjures an overflowing in the reader as well.
Sure. I mean, there's different ways to put it. There's a form of writing that's getting the idea out that should just kind of flow, or where you're writing the story out that's going to flow. But then when it goes back to the kind of Butler from Where Dreams Come, like making sure the imagery lines together, making sure everything's consistent, it's torture. When it goes back to like editing the paper and refining, it's torture. But the writing itself with the initial idea, there should be there should be a kind of fire, there should be a seeing it all and it's coming together. If not, then don't sit down and force yourself to write something. Don't do that.
We kind of get.
You need to go read more. I mean, that's the thing. Like, if you don't have, in my opinion, like this is where I was saying earlier, you got the reading, the talking, and the writing diet. Like, if there's no. You really should not be saying, I want to write. You should just find yourself writing. And if you say, I want to write, then you probably should be reading, actually. Like, you probably should be listening to other people. Like, the moment you say, I want to write, that means there's not an idea that's, like, trying to kill you. Like, there's a way in which, like, big ideas that you have to capture feel like they're trying to kill you.
Yeah.
They're trying to overwhelm you. They're trying to kill you.
Yeah.
If you're not fighting something, then it's not time.
And I think you do feel this too, like that idea of the pressure. It's weird, like there's a different type of pressure in the metrics type of system, right? Whereas there's this kind of like, it's certainly like an external pressure versus an internal pressure, where it's like this is about to burst. I think with creatives, with if you have sort of that the drive, not just the drive, but also this feeling of like, I really need to say this or get this. I need to really put this somewhere. I feel this compelling, like I'm just supposed to.
Yeah, you described it well in your anchor talk. You had that anchor recording that was good on that, on will, like being forced to, not being forced. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, it's like that makes makes a big difference. But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like the ability to feel the sense of like like the idea of it's going to kill you. You use that language.
Yes.
It's almost like this idea of if you don't get this out, it eventually it starts to really like wear on you.
There's a kind of, it has to feel like there's a kind of consequence.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's like, but they're just, it's kind of like you literally just kind of like, there's something that you are carrying around in a sense, and you need to sort of put it down. Yes. And it's like, you really must do it. If you don't, then it's just, you just kind of get, it's very hard to describe the feeling, but it almost feels like there's just this backlog of stuff you need to sort of put down and put somewhere, make into something. Yes. And that's the feeling that like really, I think, is really, I feel like that's when it's funny, that it's a pressure, and it's kind of like, it sounds not a very positive feeling, but that's when you do take the time to actually put it, let it out. It's a very wonderful flow. That's I think those things work in conjunction for this ease. I think that's good language.
Yes, there's a kind of pressure that builds that leads to the flow, because it's being pushed out to create a certain flow. Like if you don't feel that like when people say they want to write, or they want to be a writer, or they want to do something, the very fact that you're saying that can kind of indicate that there's not a pressure. Now you have to decide. Like if you say, okay, I want that. Whatever you guys are talking about with that pressure thing, I want that. Well, I personally think the way you get it is by reading a lot of books. Books. Or if you listen to lectures on YouTube, or you need to afterwards sit down and process it. And I think something happens when you read a lot and you have a lot of discussions with philosophical people. Something what begins to happen is stuff is in your head. Now, you've got to do a process to retain it. But once you start to retain it, it goes from, it's almost like an expedient, like it's very like nothing, but then stuff starts connecting. You read Jung and Faulkner, and suddenly Jung and Faulkner is connecting in your head, and you had that conversation with Javier, and that's connecting, and boom, 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 boom. And there's a boom, sort of a thought. But you have to have enough stuff in your head that you have retained, not just listened to, but like retained, that you can suddenly undergo these mysterious like connections that just pop into your head when you're weed eating. The more you read, the more you engage in conversation. And then when you write, you have new ideas, and those go in your head, and then you start getting this feedback loop thing. Like, that's where the pressure comes from. And generally speaking, if you're in a situation where you're going, I want to write, but I don't know what to write, you have not read enough. And you have to read way, 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 way more than you think.
Well, see, the thing is, I think you're totally right with what you're saying, Daniel. And something also that Bethany and I talked about was on how there is a lot of information today. A deluge of information. Yes. And so I think people already feel like, but I'm already like taking in so much information.
They're not retaining it though. They're not engaged in, practices by which to make it part of their brain.
Well, also too, they're often like a lot of the deluge of information that you're getting on the internet too can be emotionally charged, political.
Yeah, well, it's not. I mean, it's not.
Not that there's no place for that, but the point of the matter is like that's why books probably are a much better bet, because there's also books are like they can be while they destabilize your ideologies and stuff, they can be very stabilizing in a phenomenological sense.
They teach you focus as well. That's the big thing.
And they teach you focus and sustained attention, right?
Sustained attention and focus.
Right. Yes. Whereas like a lot of the internet reading consumption is fragmented. It's all over the place. It's from one thing to the next thing to the next thing to the next thing. Yes. It never ends. There's the constant the endless scrolling. Yes. And so basically, like with books, there's a beginning and an end. There's a couple hundred pages in there, and it's
on the same topic.
On the same topic.
Yes.
And it's also like of the great minds of old. The people wrestling with these questions.
Yes.
So that's where you really want to go.
You need to read books. You need to read a lot of books, and you need to read
Maybe
books.
We're biased. We're like sitting.
Well, no. There is a long history of writers emphasizing reading. This is based on a tradition.
Well, also just kind of like, look, there's millions of books, you'll never read all of them in the world, but
not even a percent.
And you have actually you have that piece on like the idea of like there's something, you remember that piece where it's like there's so many books, and like, so how do we ever know if we're educated? Because like we've never ever read all of them.
Is there progress in philosophy?
Yeah,
exactly.
But the idea is that like read as many as you can. Yes. And also read driven by that metronome I'm talking about. Read things that you're like, I just really suddenly really feel like I need to read this, or this collection. You kind of curate a collection of books that you feel like you need to read. And the thing is that like yeah, there's always more, but the thing is that books will they will remind you of like the greater conversation. And also, yes, you'll never know this for sure because there could always be one more book out there, but also reading will also teach you what people have already thought of.
Yes.
They may have already thought about it. I'm not saying that that invalidates somebody's thoughts or thinking,
sure.
but like if you're reading and you're like, oh gee, like wow, like I don't know, I've been having thoughts that are very similar. Like if you have a thought about something, okay, and you realize that like, okay, this is psychoanalytical. Let me read some of the psychoanalysts, and then you're like, oh, okay, they've actually already developed some of this thinking
sure.
already in what they've done. Let that refine your thinking. Let
yes.
that progress your thinking. Let that push your thinking.
Yes.
To make it better.
Yes.
To make it better, because you don't know yet. You don't know if it's like how developed that thought is, if it's not kind of sharpened against the other iron of those, you know, of those who have come before us, you know. And then that's why we love the contemporary engagements too, because then you also get the iron of that too, to refine your thinking as well.
Well, absolutely. And there has never been an age where the cross-pollination of different fields is possible. Like, it is now literally possible to watch like 10 lectures on economics and then do 10 lectures on psychoanalytical theory. Like, that is going to generate new ideas that no one has ever thought about before. Like, if you were to look in just economics, like if you're so concerned about writing things that have already been said, for example, well then occupy the between space between different fields.
Right, and I don't want to like say people should be paranoid. Like,
no,
I'll never write anything.
I'm always paranoid. No, you should be paranoid.
Be out there.
You should be paranoid because then you'll write more. You'll read more.
And you'll read more.
There's a healthy kind of anxiety. If you just assume what I'm writing no one has ever thought before, that's bad. There's something very good about it. There is actually something very good about assuming that whatever you're saying has already been said, and not to care. Like, that teaches a certain thymos, as Raymond will talk about, a certain sort of, like...
Not to care, like
to not, yeah, you're like, maybe someone's already written this before, I don't care, it matters to me.
Exactly.
Like, that's a certain practice.
Yeah, and that's the kind of the balance. Like, or, like, not the balance, but the dialect. You have that attitude where, like, even if this it has been said before, I don't care, because I'm, like, really inflamed about this. I'm enlivened by this, and I feel like I must share this. There's that side, but there's also the side of, like, you know, there's probably people who have asked this question before. Let me go see what they've thought about this question.
Yes.
Because I'm not the first person in human history who's probably had grappled with X, Y, or Z.
Well, I mean...
You know what I mean? And so it's this balance where you acknowledge, like, wow, there's people who can help refine my thoughts here.
Yes.
But then also to say, I'm still going to write this.
I mean,
and
generally...
I will, because the thing too, you know, you could be an entry point to a whole way of thinking that, yeah, sure, like maybe somebody in some country in some book has already, like, I mean, it's not going to be ever verbatim, but like has said like something very similar. But who's going to necessarily be able to access that book all the way over there in, like, you know, Helsinki, like, you know, some town somewhere else? You know, if you basically become a representation of that idea in your area, in your arena.
Sure, I mean...
So yeah, that's why I would definitely say still write it, even if you think maybe someone said it, you should still write it. But read in order to refine it.
Yes. I generally... I mean, I myself generally don't think in terms at all of, am I the first person to say this? Has anyone else said it? It's there. There's some sort of flame. Capture it. Period. And actually, you know, the truth of the matter is, I actually just go on and assume someone already said it.
That's really good.
I just go on and I always assume that whatever I'm saying...
And with billions of people on the planet, it's probably...
Yeah, I just assume it already has. I mean, and the reason I do is, like, I just assume someone already has. Because then it just makes it about the work.
Thanks for saying that.
It just makes it about the work.
Yeah.
As weird as it sounds, I'm... in that Waking Life animated philosophy movie from years ago, there was that part with the Ethan Hawke character. And this, where they talked about how there were these crossword puzzles, and they gave it to a bunch of people, and, you know, like 40% of people, no, like 20% of people got it right. And then 2 weeks later, after distributing the crossword puzzle around the, you know, millions of people did it, they did it again to people who'd never seen it, and now like 80% of people passed the crossword puzzle. And the idea of this experiment, which I think is real, and that they've done, is that there's something about, like, millions of people thinking a thought that then somehow in like a collective consciousness way helps other people who have never seen the crossword puzzle think the thought. So how do I know? Like, I just kind of choose, whether that's just woo-woo or like ridiculous, I just personally choose to believe that. Like, where I say, which is to say that maybe the only reason I'm having any of the ideas I'm having is because there's people around the world having these ideas that are helping me put the thoughts in my head. So, you know... And then you
articulating it and writing it would actually bolster that, right? That'll just even further, like,
create the movement of that. Whatever that collective consciousness thing is. I am literally, when I said woo-woo, you like that?
Yeah, well, no, just like, oh, you did. But like the when you quoted, like, when you like referenced this movie.
Yes.
I don't know why, like, I felt like some like kind of hyper obscure, like some X-File episode back in like 1993. Like,
wow. Yeah, I didn't know you were into, you know.
No, I wasn't. I was terrified of X-Files. Oh, even like the creepy like soundtrack. Well, I would listen to I would listen to that creepy soundtrack.
Why?
Well, it was part of this like album.
Okay. Your 1993 album?
Yeah.
Wow, you 6-year-olds. I tell you what.
There was this album, and Marilise and I listened to it way too much and walked around the room and did did these interpretational dances and stuff.
That's cool. With X-File music.
No, it's just that one track. And because it was like, it went into like other music that was not the X-File.
That's great.
It sounded kind of similar.
That's good.
And then there was like Enya and like Sade. Anyways, never mind.
Well, that's good. Well, I'm glad that my woo-woo made you think of your interpreting dancing when you were 6.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Thanks.
I didn't watch the X-Files really, but I remember the giant scary video game.
I didn't either, Daniel. Let me
I didn't
just
say you did.
this.
But there was a giant pink video game box in the reboot that would come down on all of the digitally animated characters on Saturday morning cartoons that I remember as being pretty terrifying. But anyway, I guess for me, I have found it very, like, there have been times where like, oh, I guess Hegel already thought that. Oh. And then I go, then you can say, oh, shoot, but you can say, well, maybe the whole reason you came up with that is because Hegel thought about it, added it to the collective consciousness, and that's why you came up with it.
And so the thing is, Daniel, some people are gonna read you or talk to you, but they may never get to Hegel. They may never read Hegel. You know what I mean? So that's why it's really important to write the thing.
Well, the point I'm getting at, exactly to what you're saying, is the high order complexity of what does what is beyond human comprehension.
Beyond, yes.
So don't even worry about if it's original or if you're the first or if someone's already done it. Worry about creating the pressure. And to create the pressure in your head, you have to read.
Right, and then doing something with that pressure.
You're not reading to make sure you're saying something new, although, if someone has said something, then you don't maybe necessarily need to go write it again. But if the pressure builds, the thing is, let me say this, I guess. When the pressure builds, it tends to be a pretty good bet that whatever is building is worth saying.
Yep.
Like, when you don't have the pressure and you try to write something, I just find there's a lower probability that it's going to create value. Now, I can't say that's always the case.
Sure.
But there's something about the pressure in engaging in practices to create the pressure that create a higher probability of return on investment, per se. Return on your time. But you read to create pressure. You don't worry about originality. You don't worry about, did someone else say this? You don't worry about these things, because all any of this can do is pull you out of the flow.
Yeah, and I think absolutely. But we're kind of talking about this in terms of like reading, right?
Yes.
Like reading being what helps to build the pressure. And that's because it's stimulating, right?
Yes.
It's stimulating.
Yes.
And it brings to mind many other thoughts, right?
Yes.
And so when you're reading, and this though could get into like why it's important to read actively, right? Because you can just like, you can passively read stuff, and I don't know. I kind of forget now, like, I mean, a lot of it has to do with just, are you reading because somebody told you to?
Oh, in school?
Yeah. Like,
oh, yeah. Well, I think not reading.
It's very hard to actively read when you just feel like you have to, or, I mean, I was like...
In school, you're just literate. You're not reading in school.
I don't know. I don't think so. I really genuinely don't feel like I read in this active way where it's starting to build pressure and the ideas and everything until after college.
Yes.
Pretty much. I mean, yeah, like I always, well, no, I didn't always love reading.
I mean,
I loved reading. I started to love reading. I started to, you know what? It was really more about the ideas, right? Like when you start to realize that people have these really unique ideas from their very unique perspectives and backgrounds. It was that motherhood and literature class.
Oh yeah.
With Tate.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget. Like it was like, I don't know, it was like 7 girls. Well, there was one boy on the first day. He left though. Yeah. We didn't tell him to leave. Like he could have stayed. He just didn't. He felt he wasn't going to stay. It was also like 8 a.m.
Oh yeah.
And it was funny how, you know, you go from high school being like, oh yeah, like I'll take an 8 a.m. class in college. Like that's fine. I have to get to school by 7:30 every morning. Like 8 a.m. should be like no big deal. Yeah. Then you get to college and you're like, why did I do this? I feel like a zombie. Like 8 is it's so early. You know? Did you have that experience?
I never signed up for an 8 a.m. class.
So you just knew better than...
A birdie whispered in my ear that the sun should be well in the sky before you sit in a desk.
Oh my! Well, I didn't get that little memo.
You were more.
I was like, you know, not being very smart, basically. Optimistic, like it's 8. That's not that early. It's not 7, you know.
That's 7.
Anyways, so it was this 8 a.m. class with you know, Caroline Tate and these other women, seven of us, and you know, it was motherhood and literature, and that class made me want to become and you know, pursue English, as a major, as one of my majors, and I just one of the reasons why was not even so much the raw text, though they were interesting. Some of them were, wow, a drag. Some of them were.
Yeah.
But it was the fact that people would share their reflections, thinking about thoughts and like reflections on these stories, you know, like Moll Flanders. Well, Moll Flanders was a drag, but that was one of the books, for example. Sorry. It just was for me.
Sure.
But, you know, let's say you're reading Moll Flanders and you get these people sharing their reflections on this book from their backgrounds. You know, it's like, oh, I always know Kelsey would bring up something like related to like agriculture and farming, and like, you know, Arya would bring up, you know, like these people who I still remember their names. They would always have that kind of like that flavor to their commentary. Like it would always be very unique to who they were.
Yes.
And then it would shed light on this book that maybe was a drag, but now the book was very became a lot more interesting simply because of hearing other people's perspectives on it, you know?
Yes.
And it enriched the text a lot. And then, you know, you got some text that were in and of themselves very rich and just, you know, robust in and of themselves. Yes. But I always felt the dialogue and seeing how people shared from their own experiences was so just very powerful to me. It was very powerful to me. And it made me realize like the power of the human narrative and stories, and that, you know, everybody is actually living their own story out in a sense and writing their own story essentially. And so just basically the idea that like it's, you know, this active reading, you know, it really started to show me like an engaging with texts in a different way, you know, where it's not just merely like I'm reading to get to extract particular information for a task, or to basically be able to merely summarize, though I think summarizing is a big part of comprehension. But there's this like summarizing, but not just that, like what are your unique questions that you would want to ask about what's being presented, and then also how would you see your own life like related to that particular story. But anyways, the whole idea is that like active reading is I don't know, I just feel like it's hard because how do you even teach active reading? The whole idea is that you kind of do this from some sort of like intrinsic desire, right? This kind of place of like intrinsically motivated. Not I don't know if we want to call it mere desire, but what I mean to say is like if active reading is what builds the pressure, okay? And people are kind of desiring to want to write or create. And some people aren't though. Some people aren't, and that's fine too. But it's almost like you just have to let people come to it in their time.
I mean, now you're getting into like the massive question, you know, motivation, different thing. You know, a few things. One, you're probably not going to actively read until you have that realization of books having like such a personal stakes. Stakes. It's all about stakes. Like, once you realize that there are stakes to this, like, books matter, ideas matter. Like
a sirloin or like a fillet?
Yeah, fillet. Like, once you get that there are stakes, then this becomes important. Like, if the only stakes of books is to get a job, then whatever.
Yeah, like when you're suddenly wrestling with questions of, like, you know, just like the real questions of existence and yourself.
There's
like
stakes.
Yeah, then you're like, wow, I can't read enough. I can't get enough.
But also so a few things. One, generally speaking, school is where you go to hate books, and it's very unlikely unless you get just happen to get that English teacher or happen to have that discussion group. School's where you go to hate books.
Well, because it's so much about metrics. You know, even like the summer readings, like you have to read this many books, and
everyone hates books. Like, the majority of people hates books. Like, it's not even close.
Sad.
I think the average American reads, 2 books a year? I don't think that's wrong. It's something insane. People don't read. They don't read at all. Why? Because school taught them to hate books. Like, that's it. You cannot have... But basically, every child, all they want to do is read books. They want you to read to them every night. They want you to look at pictures. They love books. And then they hate them. All the children hate them. How? What's the common denominator? I'll let you guess. So school's where you go to hate books. But, anyway, if you want to, like, this notion of, like, wanting to write, and we've said you need the pressure. Like, the pressure's going to come from the stakes, like knowing there are stakes, because stakes and pressure go together. You feel pressure if there are stakes. So that means you have to bring yourself to a place where you truly believe that ideas matter. Well, one of the ways you do that is by reading books of which show you what happens when people have bad ideas. Or biographies will go a long way.
Biographies are really powerful.
Read the books that are going to go, oh my gosh, people thought X, so they did Y, and the country burned in flames.
It's funny you say that, because actually, like, biographies were always one of my favorite things.
I think biographies is a tremendous place to learn stakes.
Yeah, and I will say really quick, I think school introduces you to a lot of books, and that's great, and it can really spark a fire, like, oh, that's so interesting, or like, oh, like, there are playwrights, and the people write plays, and that's so cool.
Sure.
I think the only challenge is that just the orientation of that reading, like, what is it ultimately for? And then also, you're just, I don't know about you, in my school there was a lot of homework, a lot of stuff you had to do, and you're just like, even if you had some were intrinsically motivated to, like, read all of the plays you could get your hands on by whatever playwright, like, you just, when do you get to have the time? Like, how do you get the time to do that if you also have to do all your other subjects?
Let's say I gave you a chocolate cake.
Okay, please do.
And you really like a chocolate cake. And then, but what if I told you that with every bite of the chocolate cake, you had to write 3 sentences on what it tasted like. And then you also had to give a report on the ingredients. And you also, then immediately after you finished the whole chocolate cake, had to eat a second one. Suddenly the experience of the chocolate cake would suck. And so basically, if you take great literature and give people arbitrary tasks and make them read 500 books all in a row about the same subject without any variation at all because they're spaceless, yes, they hate books. It's very easy.
That's really funny, thinking about it like that thought experiment with cake. That's very interesting.
It is very easy to make anything that anybody likes something they hate. All you have to do is surround it with terrible tasks.
That feel meaningless, because the other thing too is, like, you would, it's just kind of like when you start reading books that actually feel relevant to your life and to your own questions you're wrestling with. Wow, different story.
No one came out of the Globe after a Shakespeare play and did a test. No one finished watching freaking Macbeth and then did an exam on the characters. They watched Macbeth and go, oh, and their life changed. They never took a test. Like, they never took a test. The majority of people, no one who saw Shakespeare live took a test on Shakespeare. None of them. So we should think about how we teach Shakespeare. Like, we don't take kids to watch Shakespeare plays. And if they do, they know it's just to get ready for the exam on Friday. Or maybe it's after the exam, so they no longer care, and it's just like an extracurricular test. It's just a field trip. There is no going into, like, there's no going to watch a play as if you're entering a sanctuary to behold one of the great achievements of mankind, and you should really look at it closely, because this is one of the great achievements of mankind. There's none of this. Whereas, back then, if you went to the Globe or to go watch these plays, you know, this would, one, be one of the few things of entertainment you got to do. Two, you'd have to stand and watch. And three, you knew this was important. Yeah. So the stakes are gone. And so from a place where you have been trained to not associate writing and reading with stakes, then of course you're not going to have the pressure to write or to generate, because there are no stakes. There has to be stakes. When there are stakes, it's amazing what humans can get done. Like, if you can't, like, if you've got, like, a deadline and you're going to be in serious trouble if you don't do X, Y, and Z, it's amazing how focused people can get on X, Y, and Z when there is, like, real consequences. Like, people can get stuff done. When you get that there are stakes, true ontological stakes to reading and writing, then that creates an intrinsic pressure for yourself. And you are asking, where do you get that intrinsic pressure from? I think it has a lot to go with accepting the premise that there are stakes in the life of the mind, that there are stakes in ideas. And if you believe also that the school system is failing in its duty to address ideas, to account for the situation and the problem of ideas, because there's a kind of the fact that ideas exist is a kind of problem. It's like Roger Scruton talks about sex, right? Like, sex is a kind of problem that every society has to deal with, and we think of it as purely terms of pleasure and a great thing, but it's actually a kind of problem, because how are you going to keep teenagers from having sex and then having a lot of unwed, you know, pregnancy or different things, right? There's a kind of way that sex is a problem you have to manage, so that is a good thing, right? So that is good. Ideas are a kind of problem. Ideas are a problem that you have to manage, because people have ideas on how the world should be. They follow those ideas and blow it up.
Well, it's funny you say this, because I almost wonder if and again, like, there's always pros and cons to everything, so there can definitely be pros here in this arena as we talk about education a bit here, but, like, I wonder if, like, the education system is, like, almost just, like, does know that ideas are problems, so they're just, like, smash them all out. Smash!
Yes.
You know?
They
it's not
think,
just, like, let's just completely, like, just make people not want to have, like, it's weird. It's almost
but that's
just like
Foucault. Yes,
yeah.
There is a way in which this goes like ideas are a problem, so let's make people stupid. That is absolutely a
not
part
that that's
of
like their
methodology.
mission. It's weird because their mission is the opposite, but it ends up.
No, I mean, no. If we follow Foucault or whatever, their mission is to make you dumb.
Okay.
You know, not right. Not I'm saying like every teacher is in a conspiracy, but basically it's to make you part of capitalism. There is something about that. School is to make you not think too much.
Or think a certain way. Right?
But of course, it wouldn't succeed at that unless it told you that it was there to help you think, because people would, you know, they'd see the trick and they'd catch it. But the problem is that means school is dealing with the idea of problems by solving ideas away. That's not. Ideas are a problem you have to manage, not that you can solve. And ideas are a problem precisely because you need them. You know, in the same way you need sex. Civilization ends without sex. There are no babies. Likewise, without ideas, we're doomed. There's no economy. There's no abstract reasoning. There is no technology. There is nothing. We are doomed without ideas. So you can't simply solve the problem of ideas by making everyone stupid. You need to make everyone good at ideas. Well, how in the world do you do that? Well, that's the whole trick. That's where you then have to enter into the whole philosophical life, right? Like the moment you say, well, how do we handle the problem of sex? Oh, well, that's where everything gets tricky, because you have to talk about family structures. And once you talk about family structures, you have to talk about socioeconomic structures. And once you talk about those, you have to talk about government structures. And then trade. And then everything. Military. Everything. Emerges from out of treating sex as a problem that has to be managed, not a problem that can be solved by just letting people have sex whenever they want.
Right.
In the same way that ideas have to be managed, not just solved.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think that it makes me think about like sex having a place, right? You know, that's what marriage was always understood to be as. And similar with ideas, you know, when you actually have a project, right? When you're like, this is building toward something, you know, that is a great place to kind of put them, so they're not just kind of like, you know, right all over the place in a sense, right? But it's kind of interesting because, like you're saying, like I've been thinking about this, I've been thinking specifically about the question of sex and how it's sort of like we sometimes, and it relates to our conversation on transformative philosophy, but there's a way in which we are not very comfortable or encouraged to acknowledge our vulnerabilities, right? Like, instead, we sort of feel like, yeah, we'll acknowledge. So, for example, we need sex, right? So we need it, but it's like there's a way in which now it's like acknowledge that and just sort of meet that need independently.
Yes.
Okay. A lot of times that means to be in the isolation or in some sort of like, apart from the structure or the system or the whatever you want to call them, traditions or places that used to be where you would find the solution for that, or you would meet that need in that, right? And I think part of that can be like, well, isn't that like we are kind of solving it, right? We're just kind of giving people more tools and more access to sexual activities or whatever material, whatever it is, online, things like that, that can like basically meet that need for people. And so like in some ways that feels like, oh great, everything's hunky-dory because like now everyone's need is met, right? But the issue is that it doesn't actually allow us to be in the fullness of our humanity, our humanness, which is the state of helplessness, which actually puts you before others.
Right.
And it puts you in a place of revealing that you have this, have this need. Right. And I think there's something about marriage that used to be like a recognition of, I actually need help with that. Sure. And so it was like, a place of that having a bound, having a place to put it, kind of like a wick for a candle. So not everything's burning down. But there's still light and warmth, and there is the burning in that area, in that particular place.
Yes.
But it was also this ability to say, like, basically to me, I'm like, families on a very visible level, on a very like show the world that we need one another, basically. Yes. Right? And so I think now what seems to be happening is that there's this like needs met in isolation. Yes. And so in some ways people could think like, well, this is even better. Now people don't have to rely on each other. Yes. And in some ways it's like, it seems like a perfectly fine solution. But the problem is that it's the fullness of our humanity is to recognize our helplessness, and to fully recognize that is a type of presenting our helplessness and our need before other people in the sense of like letting us be seen for our helplessness. And like I'm saying, when you're in a family structure or something like that, there's almost this sort of admittance in your social structure that like, yes, we are in need of that kind of interrelatedness, that interconnectedness. Does that make sense? And so I'm just trying to, sorry, these are just some like thoughts that I've been having recently on sex, but I'm thinking about how that would relate then to sex as ideas, right? Like, and how in some ways we do the same of like, we have these ideas. And so it's like, well, we'll just keep it through like, I really want to expand on this another time, but sort of like the protection, right? You can talk like protected sex and stuff like that, of like the screen. Yes. The screen ultimately allows your ideas to kind of be bubbling forth and whatnot, and you can get access to all these ideas and all of this. But there's this kind of like but it's like a wildfire, but it's virtual. So it's like nobody's getting hurt. But now like you're potentially the spirit of the person, right? The spirit like in the book from the notes on the pod. Yeah. Like that type of word of spirit, like the spirit of the human, thymos, is like at risk there though, very much at risk. And completely. I think it's harder to identify that though, that something's like, possibly going wrong for the person because they're isolated. Because they're isolated and nobody knows, and like they don't, and it's like, why would you ever come out like sort of like basically like why there's such a vulnerability there, and it's so much easier just to stay sheltered and like not reveal our neediness for sex or ideas or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Sure. So a lot there.
Yeah. Well, sex had a way of pulling people out of themselves into community, right. And now everyone's talking about a need for community. Well, maybe our relation with sex changed. The incentive structure changed. Sex is not there in the same way today to pull people out of themselves. And look, if you wanted to have sex and you had to say, convince a woman to marry you, then you had to be of a certain character. You know, there was a demand on you that was put. But if you can fulfill sexual gratification in other ways, that demand is not there as much. And capitalism rushes in and says, we'll create the demand on you, and now you're a man if you have a career. You know, and so that
do you think capitalism is in favor of like isolation and like meeting needs independently?
Yes. Absolutely.
Like in isolation?
Yes, because then everyone will work. Because if you're isolated, you know, if you're in a family, you could maybe have one salary or whatever. But if everyone is isolated, then everyone is working. Also, too, if your needs are met, what will end up happening if you're fulfilling the sexual needs by yourself? You know, you don't necessarily pay money to have sex in marriage, but once you the sex will become boring to you. Like, no one's having sex anymore. Like, the numbers show that. So what are people doing? They're going for experiences. They're going to do that. Capitalism loves the experience economy. True. So they're spending money. True. So capitalism doesn't capitalism wants sex to lose all depth. It doesn't want it in a family context. It wants sex to be something you buy. Or it wants it to be something you're bored with, so you buy something else. So there's two options. So yes, sex is all, think good old capitalism here as an ideology. Anyway, but you know, what you're saying on ideas, what ends up happening is we now treat about ideas of things. We're not part of a great conversation with lots of people. We don't read books. We have our ideas or our opinions and put them on social media. We don't earn them.
Hiding behind. There's
they're not in a community. You're talking about when you read books, you're basically saying, I need help. In the same way, like the point you're making of when you get married, you're saying, I needed other people to have sex. There was a problem I needed. There's something that the existence of the family says that we are vulnerable. Right, likewise, reading entails a kind of vulnerability.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, there's... I made a comment about, hiding, people can hide behind... or in the internet or behind the internet and sort of say things and, and they're not... maybe held as much responsible for, what they tweeted about or whatever. But the thing is that, there's nothing wrong. There's something very valuable about being able to express your opinions, your creativity, and utilize the web for good, for the good of it, which is, we've been talking about, the connections with other contemporary thinkers, people who are generating these very incredible, ideas and synthesizing ideas. That's all really, really good. It's just about, kind of being willing to do the work of it, and then also acknowledging, putting yourself sort of in a place of I don't want to say visibility. This isn't about broadcasting all of your struggles and needs. It's about being able to say, I can't do it alone. And when you reach out to books or a community or whatever, or a family structure, it's or friends, you basically are sort of sort of being able to be fuller in your humanity, because it's right, I am a helpless being, but we actually are able to help each other so much in being able to step out and then sort of collaborate and reading books is a beautiful way to do that,
Yes.
And I think too, there's also, we talked about this and also in the transformative philosophy talk, but also when you do, it's also different too. If you read a self-help book and take it back to your cave and you're just I'll read this and I'll help myself. You're that's different than sort of reading in the great conversation of all of these thinkers over time, engaging with contemporary thinkers and realizing oh wow, I'm still grappling with this particular question. It's sort of anytime you have questions, you start to show your vulnerabilities, right? The things you don't know yet. And that's really where I think is this kind of ability to be able to put yourself out there in sort of revealing the fullness of your humanity and your helplessness in order to find the beautiful satisfaction in a sense and robust becoming, right? This continual process of growing, learning, and developing more. And that's where that pressure builds. That's where the releases are. That's where then new life springs from that place.
Yeah, you have got to put yourself in a place of stakes, of ontological stakes, and if you're not vulnerable, there are no stakes. You cannot die. And so vulnerability and stakes go together. If you do not put yourself at a place where there is risk, there's no stakes. And if all of the pressure that we are describing is kind of due to having some sort of pressure, then you've got to put yourself in a place where you experience that pressure. Mm-hmm. And that's what ends up happening is you've got to make yourself believe. If you want to write, then you have to ask the question, why do you want to write? If you say, because I want to, well, that's circular. You know, you if you really, really want to write, like if you genuinely want to feel it, not to just be like, I'd like to, but if you like really want to write, like feel it, then you have to believe there are stakes.
Yes.
So the question is, what do you need to do to feel those stakes? You need to put yourself in places where you see that writing has changed the world.
Yeah.
You need to put yourself in places where you see that ideas have changed the world.
Yeah.
And likewise, what you're saying with family is you put yourself in a place where you say, wow, family matters. Family impacts how children develop. You know, children, whoa, they're their own people. Like, you say, yes. Wow, you like, to be in a family is to have a certain horizon of reality open up to you. So likewise, if you want to write, you have to have the horizon open up to you where ideas matter. And they matter a lot. Mm-hmm. And if you believe that, then you will be amazed at how motivated you are to write. And to figure out what is true, good, and beautiful, and to articulate it well. Because you have seen what happens when people don't, when the world doesn't, and when bad philosophies control people's minds. And that will create the pressure, because there will be the stakes, to engage in writing and to engage in thinking. And so, then what I would say, too, as just a kind of a practical thing in closing, is I do think if you can learn to type fast, that makes a difference, because you don't leave the flow state. So take classes to learn to type fast. Like, I took classes, like literal classes, to learn how to type. I think that's very good. Takes about a year, like, to really learn how to type without looking at the keyboard if you don't know how to do it, and then you get very fast. That is good, because then the keyboard becomes invisible to you. So as a piece of just practical advice, that. 2, read books. The other reason why reading, in addition, 1, it teaches you to focus, but it also, it's very hard for ideas to create stakes if you're moving so quickly between them that none of them ever reside in you. Like, to have something create stakes, it has to kind of reside in you, because it has to have a weight. If you move from one story to the next on Twitter, then it's very difficult for any of them to create pressure. But one of the reasons books can do it is because you make an idea, you make a story or an idea live in you. Yeah. Like, it takes up residence. And when it takes up residence, books will teach you to do that. Well, then you'll gain the ability to make yourself take up residence in yourself, to make your own idea take up residence in yourself, so you see it through and that you complete it. Because if you like if you want to write an entire book, well, then something has to live in you for a long time, right?
It's a gestation. Yeah,
it's a gestation. Well, books kind of train you in one way how to do it, to keep this 500-page thing alive in you for an extended period of time. And then when you go to do it yourself, you've kind of have familiarity with that way of thinking, with that way of being, to make something stay in you, and to remember it, and to focus on it, and to come back to it. Because those are all the skills. So reading books and taking some classes on typing. I think typing is great. Some people like penmanship. That's fine. But taking, I think those classes go a long way. So stakes, flow, and then just like not worrying about questions of are you the original thinker or not. Not worrying about those questions, but just manifesting the pressure into something actual. Capturing the flame, I think, is what you should focus on.
Absolutely, Daniel. That's great. I've been left with lots of things more to think about now, even. And I'm excited.
Well, that's good. We'll have to talk again.
Yeah, definitely. We will. Thoughts on thoughts on thoughts.